Yes, indeed. Welcome to the Bladtcast. As always, I am Christian Blatt. Very excited for this episode. Joined, at least for the first time on this show, by Little Lemi. Lemmy, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me here today.
And, you and I have been on a few of our buddy Hughesy's streams together. And I finally was like, well, let's figure out what we can talk about. And we went back and forth about a couple of different movies, but it didn't take long before we landed on what we're talking about today. Did it, Lemmy?
It did not. Very short conversation. First conversation, I think.
yeah, yeah. There's another movie that actually sounded very interesting that maybe we'll do down the road. But yes, we are indeed talking about Caligula, the 1979/1980 film with a really impressive pedigree of actors in this film. Malcolm McDowell, who really controversy kind of follows him throughout his career. I was joking with my friend Mark that I did the show with last week that, not only is he in this film, not only is he in Clockwork Orange, which is, not now, but up until like the late 90s was still banned in the UK. And he's also in a very controversial film for nerds, Star Trek Generations, which for me, that's the most controversial of all of them. But
That's one of my favorite movies. He also plays a character in a movie called Suck. It's like a B Canadian movie, and he plays a character called Eddie Van Helsing, and he's a vampire.
oh my gosh, I've
It's
never even
amazing.
heard of that one. Yeah, no,
I'll
I mean
send it
he's
to you.
great. Oh yeah, please do. And he's one of those gentlemen who, as he got older, he just looked more distinguished, and you're like, yeah, let's get him in our movie. But I'm excited to talk about Caligula because before we agreed to do this, I had never watched it. And I'd always heard about it. And I think the reputation for this film is actually pretty crazy. And in fact, when you and I were trading messages, I think I had some misconceptions about the film. So we'll spend just a couple minutes kind of explaining how it turned into the film that it is, and the many different versions of it that people have had. So I have what was called, I think, the Imperial Edition, and it'll probably disappear on the camera because of my fake background. But so I got a DVD of this. They didn't have it on Blu-ray, Lemmy. They felt like I didn't need to have, they're like, Caligula, you don't need in 4K Ultra. But I was excited to get it because I could not find long uncensored versions of it online, at least not through legitimate channels. I probably could have gone to a number of different corners of the globe, of the internet. So I get this version that my understanding was that it was the most complete version. And then I was doing research here that Deadline reports that this summer, the ultimate cut will be released in North America. And I believe, I thought I saw the runtime on this. It's like closer to 3 hours. So, yeah. So, get your friends together. You'll be able to actually go enjoy this in theaters, Lemmy. I think that's the important thing to have right there. And by the way, in the chat, our pal Kaylee, also known as Lucy Tightbox, with a big woohoo because we invited her to join us on this, and she's like, no, I love this movie too much to talk about it, and we appreciate that she's here. Basically driving over to Carl's house right now to appear on Who Are These Podcasts today, but we appreciate that Lemmy's here with us, and the Quadfather checked in. And Lemmy let me know that her computer froze and she'll be back momentarily. So we're going through the chat, and I appreciate the fact, Kaylee, that you just want to hear us talk about it. If you want to share even one or two thoughts in the chat, please do, Kaylee. We appreciate that you want to leave this to Lemmy and I. So for people that aren't as familiar with Caligula, the thing to really know is that it's written by Gore Vidal, who is, sort of like the height of artsy intellectuals from the late 70s. It was directed by a gentleman named Tinto Brass, and they both have disavowed the finished version of this film, the way that it turned out. And there's a really simple reason why they kind of disavow the final cut. Because if you watch the movie, you'll see that it was released by Penthouse International Films. And if you're thinking, oh, that might be a different Penthouse, no, it is not. It is the Gentleman's Magazine, the discerning Gentleman's Magazine. When you're too classy for Hustler, you check out Penthouse. So Bob Guccione was the financier producer of this. And he, when the film was finished, my understanding, and when Lemmi comes back, she'll tell me if I'm wrong about any of this, but when Lemmi comes back, she'll let me know for sure. But it seemed like after the film was done, they went back and filmed a lot of just absolutely hardcore sex scenes. I couldn't believe that, at 45 years later, the level that was put into this. So, Lemmi, one of the things that you and I were trading messages about when this first came up was this idea that the actors kind of went home and then at night they filmed the hardcore sex scene. That's not actually what happened. I believe you schooled me on the misconception about Caligula.
No, yeah, I think they just. I'm pretty sure it was after the fact. They made the movie, and then Larry Flynn was like, "Oh, interesting. I bet I could spice this. I could spice this up."
Well, Bob Guccione, we have to have the right smut peddler in here. And by the way, Quadfather chimes in. I saw an advertisement for Caligula in a porn magazine I found when I was very young in the 80s, and they went to. Well, I'm getting ahead of ourselves. So I was very much aware that there were different versions of this film, and that the full version was it premiered in Italy. And it was banned about a week later. And then eventually they figured out a way to kind of show it. There were a lot of compromises in a bunch of different countries where they would show it, but it was like, in like art houses. And I guess the studio, which is Penthouse International, the studio for it, they sort of would like rent out theaters and do private screenings that way, sort of like you would with art house films and foreign films, because what they really didn't want was for it to end up in, your typical porn theaters. But you were messaging me this morning, Lemmi. You rewatched it last night. And what struck you upon rewatching it just last night?
So many things. I forgot. Okay, I watched the dirty version, obviously. Sure. I'm not going to watch it any other way. And I watched it through Internet Archives. The dirty, like it had the dirty versions, and they didn't cut out any of the scenes. So I fucking hate that this is the one thing that stands out to me, but there was an enormous dick in one of the orgy scenes.
I think we might be thinking of the same moment, and it was very large. Yes.
Like wide as it was long.
Yes. Yeah. The potential title for this episode, Lemmi, is "Wide as It Was Long." And and I mean, it's what you said was you basically watched a 2-hour porno, and I'm like, this is the most expensive, best written, best cast pornographic film in the history of film.
It took 4 years to make that movie.
Wow, that's a long time. Yep. That's a lot of fucking and sucking. But and it's like, it's interesting because I knew sort of that there were a lot of additional scenes or additional footage filmed after the fact. And I was trying to look for like when, the main cast, specifically when Malcolm McDowell's not in a scene. You know, I'm like, all right, yeah, this is probably after the fact. He's not there. You know, Helen Mirren's not there, which, by the way, I mean, I've only really known older Helen Mirren. You know, I think in the slang of 1980, she was a stone cold fox, Helen Mirren.
Oh, yeah.
Good for her, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, on death's door, at least his character, Peter O'Toole, John Gielgud is in this movie, and you're like, wait a minute, what could possibly be so wrong with this movie? I mean, I don't think anything's wrong with this movie, but when you think about audiences' perception of what they were getting, and if you think you're prepared for possibly one of those, you know, one of those movies where you're like, okay, this is going to be a little bit racy, you're just not prepared for what Caligula is, are you, Lemmi?
No, me and my ex-husband actually found this. I had been looking for the movie for years. And my ex-husband and I found it at a porn shop, and it was $60 fucking. And I was like, I'm getting this. I've been looking for this. So I bought it, and I was like, it's going to be like sexy and cool and fucking awesome. And we watched it, and neither one of us could look at each other at the end of the movie. Credits were rolling, and we just stared dead ahead, just going, wait, what?
Yeah, it would have been like watching it with a relative, you know. You're like, we can't make eye contact. Well, I recommend that everybody do what I did. So I watched it earlier this week downstairs on that TV, and upstairs my wife was watching the current season of Bridgerton. And then when we convened, we were both charged up in very different ways. You know, hers very romantic, and me thinking like, I should probably try that thing that I saw Malcolm McDowell do. Oh, but you know what? I'll take my my ring off this time. Kaylee jumps in. Helen Mirren in The Cook, the Thief, his wife and her lover. I believe that's an auga, but let me know if I've mispronounced that. Yeah, Quadfather's right. She's great in Red. She's great as sort of the elderly actress, the Dame Helen Mirren that she is now. But I mean, this is like, you know, I don't know. This is imagine if, oh my God, what's her name? Meghan Markle had made this film before she met Prince Harry, you know? So, Kaylee's commending me in my auga. So, so that was the first time you saw it. You purchased it from a porn shop, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I bet you didn't feel like you overspent those $60.
No, I didn't. I watched it several times alone after that.
Right. And so would you say that your ex-husband just did not enjoy it?
No.
Okay.
And it wasn't because of all the porn or sex or anything. I think he thought it was like too theatrical for his taste, because it was very theatrical and ornate and just like very Shakespearean.
Yeah, well, there's that quality to it, specifically to Malcolm McDowell's performance in the early part. It's reminiscent of, like, you know, when we were in high school, they would show us like the BBC production of Hamlet with like Derek Jacobi and, you know, those Shakespearean trained actors, which obviously Malcolm McDowell is a fine actor, and he's approaching this in sort of that way. And what I found made it fascinating is that you see sort of the way this guy unravels, because he's like completely left to his own devices. And it's very late in the film where somebody starts to think, yeah, we probably got to do something about this guy. You know, I mean, so the version that I watched was about 2.5 hours. I'd say about 2 hours and 15 minutes. It's all like, well, you know, he's Hail Caesar, basically. Let him go, you know. And I don't want to see how historically accurate this is. You know, I like to think that this is basically out of a history book, Lemmi.
Mm-hmm. The same. I remember about halfway through the movie, I'm like, should I do some actual research on Caligula, or do I just want to like believe this is the way? I was like, I'm just gonna believe this is the way.
Well, I had to be careful when I ordered this off Amazon. The first thing that came up, it was like almost like a History Channel documentary that had been released on DVD. I'm like, no, that's not what I'm interested in. I again, I was here for the fucking and sucking, and Quadfather does commend me on having a separate Spank TV. That's not exactly how it worked out, but I was not going to say to my wife, "Hey, you want to check this out?" When we consider how little time we have to watch things with two small kids, and if Seamus McAnus is in the chat, I'm going to put up a message from him. Got the special edition from either Severin or Vinegar Syndrome, and it was literally like 20 minutes before you and I connected today. I saw that article about it being in theaters, and I'm like, I hope it turns into like an event. You know how like when people go and see Rocky Horror Picture Show and they dress up, and maybe giant, thick and wide, fake penises. I mean, you could really have an event out of this, couldn't you, Lemmi?
Absolutely, man. Toga party. Try the wine.
So,
wrong movie.
Yeah, it's fine. So, if there's anything in the movie I want to start with, is there the one scene where you're like, okay, this is probably the least necessary. This probably created more trouble than it was worth. I could see a filmmaker deciding, I'm going to compromise my artistic vision as a smut peddler to take this out. Is it because there's one for me, but I'm wondering what it might be for you.
There are so many scenes that could have done without. And if I'm going with useful versus graphic, there was the useless scene of the two girls fucking through the peephole. That was a very useless scene. I appreciate it, cool beans, but it felt very superfluous and useless.
I mean, I might have watched it twice, but I understand what you're saying.
But when we go with graphic, I would say the dinner scene where they're like fucking and he starts yelling at him, and then he charges the Senate's wives with like prostitution after he whored them out.
Right. He did whore them out. Yeah, I know. And then that actually that's pretty much right at the moment when they realize that we got to get rid of this guy. By the way, in the chat, Tiberius, I take no formal responsibility for the actions of Caligula. Hail Caesar. We appreciate it.
He was adopted. So
yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. So for me, I think it is useful story-wise to understand that he bestows a blessing on a newly married couple. But the fact that, I would imagine without even doing any research, I feel like there are versions of this film where, he takes the wife and violates her, and then he never does anything to the husband. But the graphic nature, like whatever that fistful of lube was that he got, the fact that they made sure to show us he left his ring on, and he just went to Fist Town, and I'm like, oh, this is why people talk about this movie in that way. But it is definitely the way that this character, this historical figure, is asserting his domination over everything in everyone's life. From taking the virgin wife to taking the husband's virgin hole, at least presumably. I guess, it was Rome. Shit got crazy. But, there's a moment, and I wonder what you were thinking about this, Lemmi. There's a moment where, he's got a fever, and whatever this fever was that made them sick. And he's in bed with the horse. And we don't really see him do anything with the horse. And maybe that's in this new study. Do you think Caligula fucked his horse?
Probably. He was insane.
Yeah.
He was insane. I'm gonna go with to err on.
We're gonna go with yes on that one. And Jake Hudson showed up at exactly the right moment to say, "Hey guys," when I'm asking if Caligula fucked his horse. And it's almost like they're playing it up. It's like, oh man, he had a fever. He wasn't thinking straight. And Quadfather's right. When in Rome, you fuck a horse. But I mean, it's just like those are like levels of the story where you're like, Malcolm McDowell got into bed with the horse, so like they were telling these aspects of the story. so much so that there's a scene with sheep where I'm like, oh, clearly something's going to happen here. I was shocked that nobody fucked a sheep. Maybe I missed something, but I'm pretty sure nobody fucked a sheep.
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any bestiality in it whatsoever. No blatant bestiality.
No blatant bestiality, but implied bestiality. But you know what there was a lot of was incest.
Yes.
Because, again, his sister was hot. So I can understand, her catching your eye. And interestingly, she's probably the only person in this film that actually loves him, that cares about him.
Yes, he was. You've never seen him more happy than in the arms of Drusilla, which is sick, but it is beautiful. And it's so sad to see him devolve into somebody who would like slap her.
Yeah.
It's a love story gone wrong.
So many different ways it goes so many twists and turns. There's so many avenues that it goes down, but so I don't know. I think it's a film that I've been promoting on other shows that we were going to be doing this stream talking about Caligula, and people that I know who have seen all sorts of movies, they'll say things like, I've never actually seen the whole thing. They only get to a certain point, and there's a breaking point for a lot of people, and when they stop watching it. And look, I don't know, there might have been a time in my life where I was like, I might need to break this up over a couple of days, but I think that I'm glad it exists, that this film got made, that we're able to see it. I think at this point it's not really banned in as many countries. What other than just sort of, we have basically this love story with his sister. We have Peter O'Toole. We have Helen Mirren. And I'm sort of wondering just some of the things that strike you as you rewatch it and compared to the way that you remembered the film, and sort of like, was there anything where you were like, oh yeah. Is there anything, what I'm trying to say, is there anything that you noticed this time that maybe hadn't been there for you before, like a new layer to this story?
Yep. I paid more attention to the actual acting of it this time, and like the actual story of it this time, instead of focusing on all the naughty bits,
Right.
And one of my very favorite things was the juxtaposition of atmosphere of when Tiberius was the emperor versus when Caligula was emperor. Like when Tiberius was emperor, they would go into that, he would hang out in this like red circus freak like atmosphere, whereas Caligula's atmosphere was more like the pimping out the Senate's wives, but it was still like white and like columns, and it still looked kind of clean, I just noticed the differences between the two. I also noticed his reactions of the terrible things he would do, like when he fisted that dude on his wedding night.
Yeah.
His Caligula's reaction when he looked at his hand and saw the blood, he was just like, ugh.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he just like destroyed and traumatized somebody's life.
Yeah. Meanwhile, be glad it was only blood. I mean, think about how much worse that could have been. That's actually a great point. There's that. That's the disgust, not in what he had done to this newly married couple. It's more like, come on, what kind of, well, it's an interesting choice of phrase. What I was about to say is, but what kind of pussy bleeds the first time he gets fisted in his asshole, and yeah, there's a lot of disgust from Caligula, I think, in the film, and it's there's definitely times where you're just sort of in awe of what happened, and ultimately it really just seems to always go back to, he wants an heir to continue the bloodline, and he also wants to be with his sister, but he knows that I love this exchange where they're like, well, we're not Egyptian. I was like, oh, we're just gonna let that slide. Yeah, in Egypt, obviously there's all the sister fucking you can manage. And I was like, well, I didn't know that. And Bad at Karate asks, what kind of I assume he means what kind of pussy are you, but also what kind of pussy are you? But glad that Bad at Karate is here. We've got some great friends in the chat, Lemmi. People knew that me and you were going to get together and talk Caligula. This was appointment viewing. Was there anything that you felt, okay, it's not too much for me, but this just really doesn't work. You talked about the scene where the two girls are, looking through the peephole, and uh, you know, I felt like all the peephole stuff was shot after the fact. Like
Oh yeah.
anytime you saw that camera start to zoom in on that face, the peephole was in the mouth. You're like, okay, this is going to be what we call additional photography.
Hmm.
Um, but very rarely was I like, okay, this just really seemed like too much. But was there anything that maybe this time struck you as like, okay, it was cool to see those girls go at each other, but we could have done with less fellatio, perhaps? I'm not saying that myself, but perhaps that's something that struck you.
No, I loved all of it. I can't
Yeah,
say any of it was too much because it almost left me wanting more, like push another boundary for me. You know what I mean? You killed
yeah.
a guy and we just watched a couple bitches piss all over him and masturbate, you know? Get like show me another one. What else you got in there? What in your little bag of magic tricks? I loved all of it.
Yeah, it's a great point that that scene where the girls piss on him, the scene where the dudes jack off into a bowl.
Hmm.
There's definitely a lot of that stuff, and it's like they're just trying to check off every box for the depraved that might want to check out this movie. And I I'd be kind of interested in seeing like a fully, like completely sanitized version, because I'd want to see, like, does the through line of the story work? Um, it probably does, but I feel like that makes it like almost like an instantly forgettable movie. It's I think that the naughty bits, the violence, the sex, all of that. It's like they're really sort of delving into who this guy was, and I don't know. What do you think? Would you ever watch it? Cut down to like 90 minutes or whatever you might be acceptable.
Probably because I'm into that sort of theatric, historical kind of bullshit. It'd be like tantamount to watching like the Odyssey. You know what I mean?
Right.
You could put a lot of sexy scenes in the Odyssey too, but I'd watch Caligula if it wasn't sexy. It's still a
Right.
good movie.
Yeah, no, and I think that's what happens when you have the performances. Kaylee wants us to know that she's all horned up for WATP tonight, but once you're sitting there surrounded by wood paneling, I think you dry up instantly, Kaylee. So I wouldn't worry about it. But also very excited because I'll be seeing Kaylee at Hackamania next weekend in Las Vegas. So looking forward to that. Did you consider going to Hackamania, Lemmi, or you were just like, I'm gonna stay away?
I considered it for a couple seconds, but then I was like, nah. But if
Yeah.
they ever do like a cruise, if they do like a cruise next year or something, that's something I
Wow.
could like do. I could do that.
What a great idea for a cruise. Yeah. It's the only thing I'm disappointed is that Cardiff Electric won't be there. I would love to meet the potato, but I'll be happy to meet Tukey. Anyway, we'll get back to focusing on the issue at hand. We appreciate Kaylee being so polite to say that she's going to leave us for a little bit, and she's got other stuff to do. So yeah, I just so I had a list of some scenes that are cut in different versions, and there's like different countries, and what seems to be the number one is Caligula's rape of Proculus and Livia, which is what we're talking about. So, by the way, Proculus, it's not enough that he does that. He gets killed later in the movie. You know, it's like, oh yeah, if we hadn't done enough with this guy, let's make sure that he actually stays dead. And what did you think about the way that some of the violence was portrayed with just almost like cartoony, like paint like looking blood? I feel like that's not a convention of the time. It feels like a choice, you know. And it's like maybe they're approaching this theatrically, like jumping ahead to the end. I mean, the way that the death scene is portrayed, just for the aftermath, it's like all this like really thick like red paint on everybody. Is that something that struck you when you were watching it?
Yes, it did. It reminded me of like it was like a next step above using like a see-through red scarf as blood, just very dramatically fake. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No. No. Exactly. Yeah. And it's almost like if you were doing a stage version of this,
Right.
kudos for anybody who tries to do a stage version of this. But yeah, and in some of the versions, they make some narrative choices and they move like the opening scene of Caligula and Drusilla to much later in the film. But I like the way that they immediately showed us, what this movie was going to be. And I don't know if it was clear from their conversation, but it became clear when, when Peter O'Toole's like, how's your sister? Like, oh, I barely talk to her. I mean, I don't even know. I'm sure she's fine. I've definitely not been fucking my sister. There's no way I've been doing that. Okay. Don't you worry about me. I am gonna make Rome proud.
What do I look like, an Egyptian?
Right, exactly. By the way, going through sort of some of the stuff I looked at, so the ultimate cut that was approved by Malcolm McDowell and it screened last year at the Cannes Film Festival. So this is the version that'll be in theaters this summer, I think, is 178 minutes. So simple math will tell you that is 2 minutes short of 3 hours. And I wonder if there's an intermission. Here's what I'm thinking, Lemmy. You don't do an intermission because you kind of know what everybody's going to do during the intermission. So
Yeah, I had to take like 2 or 3 intermissions last night.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's I would be interested in talking to somebody who didn't bail on the movie when they found it to get to be too much and maybe didn't like it and watched it all the way through. I'd be fascinated in that sort of conversation. I mean, I guess when the only way to see movies was in a theater, there had to be somebody, that was dragged there on a date. But if any girl that I ever dated, long before I was married, had brought me to see this movie on the first date, I probably would have married that girl, So I would have been like, yep, no complaints. There's a lot that we can probably, let slide. Lazy Drunk, I'm going to agree to disagree. That was pee. That was definitely not squirt. There was too much of it, which I didn't realize last week when we were reviewing the latest Planet of the Apes film on the Bladtcast that we would just a week later be talking about the difference between pee and squirt. But I probably should have assumed when we were talking about this film,
It was pee.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, like that's the authority right there. I felt I never considered anything otherwise. So there was an R-rated cut in October 1981, and it was released as not rated when it came out, at least in the U.S., because they're like, well, it's immediately going to be X-rated, and that's not going to help our film. So they cut out 51 minutes of footage, and that's really a lot. When you think about it, it's to just think about. Some of it's very simple, and I'm sure some of the countries that this was in, they're just like, we gotta get all the dicks out of this movie, because I don't know if you noticed, Lemmy, there's a lot of dicks in this movie. You talked about the large one that filled up the whole screen, but there's also many scenes where there are lots of little ones sort of running in the background, which, let's be honest, if you're editing for content, it's going to be tough to include those scenes, don't you think?
A little bit. I don't know if you've also, there were baby rattles. They were playing with the babies with baby rattles shaped like dicks. And they were feeding their pet tigers bottles, but instead of being a bottle, it was testicles and a dick skin with milk or formula in it, feeding it to the fucking lions.
And I think it's Proculus that it happens to. They do. They feed the dick and they feed the balls, I think, too. Was it that
the
also?
The tip of the dick.
Yeah. Well, because honestly, that's where the most flavor is. Obviously, the tip is what you want to eat. Yeah. So it's I don't know. What did you think of the sequence where he sort of ends up like kind of homeless on the street for a little bit? Uh, I wasn't. I felt like it maybe wasn't fully realized. Where it's just like, I mean, he doesn't even fuck anybody in that part, does he?
No, he doesn't fuck anybody, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think that happened in real life. It may have, but I think it was just one of those cliche moments like, I have to see what the people are saying
Yeah.
about me, you know? But it was I liked the scene. He gets put in prison and
Yeah.
they kind of find out who he is by the ring or whatever. But
Yeah, and there's if you have to go to prison, a co-ed ancient Roman
mhm.
prison is probably not the worst place to be because there was a lot of fun stuff happening, and Chris in the chat with the Smurf avatar, which also looks a little phallic. The Smurf hat says "LOL, Lemmi, truth." So we appreciate that. Yeah, I found that sequence, when it started, I was just expecting like, all right, what could possibly happen here? But it was almost like, yeah, he's just trying to understand his people. But it didn't change him at all, did it, Lemmy?
None. None.
And I mean, one of the, we're talking earlier about stuff that's not the most necessary. It is sort of that late in the film sequence with the when he does whore out all the senators' wives, and there's like the points in the beginning where he's talking about what is it, just full 5 gold crowns or whatever. He keeps saying it again and again, and that was also one of those where I'm like, yeah, but how many times did he say that on set? Or they're just like looping his voice so it seems like he's still there in the room when he's clearly not. And that's sort of the point that we were making earlier. That is very representative of this film because that's the level of depravity and debauchery that, yes, he fostered, but there's a lot of people taking part in that weren't there, Lemmy.
Oh yeah. I mean, the Senate was even taking part in it. They were letting their wives be whored out. They didn't
Yeah.
seem like they weren't doing it non-consensually. Everybody
Yeah.
looked like they were having a blast, making
Wow.
money.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about the tree trunk of a schlong that shows up in that scene. So obviously, it's like, yeah, I guess it's this is all right. This is okay to step out of our marital bedroom and try some new things.
For
But
Rome.
yeah, for Rome, exactly. I do want to jump ahead because we sort of touched on it a moment ago. The death scene where they finally realize we've had enough of this guy, and they instead make that weenie guy becomes the
Oh,
emperor.
Claudius.
Yeah, Claudius. Yeah. Which he has nowhere near as much fun. And
I'd rather a stupid king than a stupid ruler than a cruel ruler, honestly.
yeah, it's a great point. I guess, of all the things that could have gone wrong on my wedding night, there was never a chance that I was going to be forcibly fisted with, I don't know, like bacon grease or whatever that was.
Lard,
Mostly,
probably.
mostly, yeah, that was 100%. That was definitely lard. There was no chance of that, mostly because my wife said no. So yeah, but we hadn't known each other for nearly long enough. Now we'd only known each other about 5 years. So
That's fair.
yeah, you get to that a little bit later. But so when everybody has enough, and sort of the death of him, and the one thing that I would say, I'm glad that there was the restraint. We just sort of see, they throw his kid to the ground, but in a way where it's like it's a split second. You can, it's basically like a scarecrow or something, and I'm like,
My buddy.
yeah, yeah, my buddy and kid sister, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically is basically Caligula and his sister in the beginning part of the film, or my buddy and kid sister. I think that if I'd seen that in my 20s and it had been graphic, it probably I would have shrugged it off. but having kids, I'm like, yeah, that and that's in the last like 2 minutes of the movie. So I would have hated for them to really lose me at that point. Or am I just being too soft, Lemmy? Should they have gone to those? Because I'm sure that's what would have happened. You have to make sure that you basically disembowel the heir to the emperor who you're trying to kill.
Snuff it. Snuff out the bloodline, dude. Make sure.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only way to be sure. Yeah. But instead they go with Claudius, and I guess there was probably no market for a sequel. What do you think about sort of the fundamental nature of this movie that we talked about in the beginning? Is that it was done basically as far as the writer and the director were concerned. Gore Vidal had his version that he wrote. Tinto Brass was like, okay, the movie's done, and then it was like, well, let's go back and really add this stuff to it. That's sort of what I was thinking when I was like, I wonder how well it works without all that stuff. Just imagine like other classic films, like if Lawrence of Arabia had an extra reel where there, again, Peter O'Toole, do you think that's dirty pool? Basically, is that a dirty trick, or is it like, wow, your movie's financed by the guy who created Penthouse?
I don't think so, because it's not been done since. I think it was very much a statement piece. And I think it was awesome. But at the time, it was the most expensive independent movie ever made. Right. And it's really, really hard to get promotion for independent films, to get it out there and be like, hey, watch my independent movie not made by Hollywood. You know what I mean? No one's going to fucking listen to you. They listen to them, and I bet they made fucking bank.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I did see in there is sort of the reception of it was that, I don't know, I think it made the equivalent of like $85 million or something. And by the way, as I was scanning through there, this is Wikipedia, so I always take that with a grain of salt. But apparently Orson Welles was initially offered $1 million to star as Tiberius, which would have been the highest salary that he ever received, probably even more than he got at anything he did after. But he refused on moral grounds when he read the script. Just imagine how Orson Welles would have felt if he had starred in sort of that scripted version and then this came out, So it kind of makes you think more of Peter O'Toole, doesn't it?
A little bit. I'm actually really glad Orson Welles passed on that, because I think Peter O'Toole was absolutely perfect in that movie. He's such an over actor in it, and it was perfect for how dramatic everything was.
Right. Oh, no. Yeah. He absolutely fits in, perfectly. And it's interesting because when you start to read about on the set stuff, like, Bob Guccione complained about Malcolm McDowell's behavior, calling the actor shallow and stingy. And during production, Malcolm McDowell took members of the production to dinner at an expensive restaurant and left the choreographer to pay for the meal, saying that he'd forgotten to bring the money for it. So there's not a lot of stories you hear about Malcolm McDowell. So he's probably maybe that's method acting. It's like, what would Caligula do? Yes. Let's all go out for a fancy dinner, and I gotta go. So you poor people can pay for this. But to your point about Orson Welles, I think that the projects that he did himself, that he was a part of, I think, obviously Citizen Kane, but I think he's great in Touch of Evil. No one's better than Charlton Heston playing a Mexican in Touch of Evil, but that's again, a choice from a different time. What would you say to somebody, having just watched this, and I've just watched it for the first time, who's like, oh, Caligula, yeah, I've heard a lot of things about it. I would say to somebody, just watch it and be ready for what this is, but you should watch it all the way through. Take a break if you need to, like you were saying, Lemmy. But this movie's not for everybody, though, is it, Lemmy?
No, it's not. But I have actually. There's a guy here on in my community named Marquise Black at You 666, and we were talking about Caligula on my stream, and he was like, "I've never seen that. I've seen about it, heard about it, but I've never seen it." And I said,
Right.
"Marquise, watch it alone."
Yes. Yeah. And I would say, like, look, there's a lot of reasons why you should watch this movie alone. One of them is so that you don't maybe have to keep your hands visible while you're watching it, but also is no matter how cool the person is watching it with you, you talked about watching with your ex-husband. It's like there's that moment of like, oh, you're the one who suggested we watch this. What does it say about you? And it's almost like, yeah, let's go ahead and watch it separately, since we can watch it from the comfort of our own home. That's great advice to watch it alone.
Well, there's a lot of debaucherous things in there, and there's a lot of carnal things in there that are very like, it's only human nature that one would feel the feelings through and it's a fucking freaky movie. You don't want to like get a boner in front of your girlfriend while a chick is masturbating on barbed wire. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's like very like, keep it in your own, like, watch it alone.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's making a very specific statement to a lady friend, or also, like, I don't know, as men, sometimes we can tell when a woman might be really into a movie in that way, even if she physically doesn't show it, and be like, oh wow, she really seemed to get excited when there were all the sheep, and then she seemed a little disappointed when nobody fucked a sheep. So yeah. But I hope that us talking about this inspires a lot of people to check it out. I do recommend the Imperial Edition, the uncut version. It looks like this, for even though it's disappearing on the camera, but there are many versions out there. After this conversation, are you leaning towards going to a theatrical presentation that apparently will be happening this summer? Because you want to watch it alone.
Not a chance in hell would I watch that movie with another human being.
Yeah. See, you as a woman, I don't blame you for a second. And then I was just thinking, oh yeah, but I also don't want dudes rubbing one out into their popcorn bucket while I'm trying to eat. Yeah, I wondered like what the policy would be. Are they going to have like, I've gone to press screenings, humble brag, but they go to press screenings and there's people who are paid to watch to make sure nobody takes out their phone and films any of it. I feel like those guys are going to be all over a theater that's showing Caligula. Like, if we hear the sound of a zipper, you get tossed out immediately. There's no questions asked. All right. So,
you got ushers in the aisles with fucking flashlights.
Flashlights. Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I'm trying to think now of like, I kind of want to, I want to gift tickets to this to somebody. I'm just trying to figure out who the right person would be. I wish Husey was in the chat, because I feel like he would go and see it in a theater, and maybe he'll watch us after the fact and let us know. Well, we're going to talk to Husey very soon about Zack Snyder. Do you have any final thoughts about Caligula? I was going to talk to you about it. Just a couple other things before we wind down. But I think it is one of those, you have to see it to believe it. And then just realize that anyone you ever talk to about it is going to have a different impression than you are. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that's very fair. But it was, I wanted to see the movie because I was obsessed with A Clockwork Orange. Yeah. So I was like, oh, Malcolm McDowell, like in his little prime or whatever. And watching it did feel almost like a continuation of the movie. It was hard for me to separate Alex from Caligula.
Oh yeah, because the ending of the filmed version, where he's like, I was cured all right, and he's like, and then I went on and I had a fever dream where I was emperor of Rome. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's very consistent. I agree. It's almost like, no, obviously they're not related, but it's like a spiritual sequel. It's like
Some
what
of the
was that?
shots even and some of the decoration in the movie was very Kubrickian. I was actually talking about that this morning. Like I couldn't help but
Oh,
notice that there were a lot of like very Stanley Kubrick like references almost. I'm not sure which one was made first, but it was very weird.
Clockwork Orange was before this, I think, but let me just double check because I don't want to be I don't want to look like a horse's ass on my own show, but I believe it was Clockwork Orange is from 1972, and this
Okay.
was filmed in 1976. That's when it began. As you said, it took them like 4 years for it to come out, so he probably hadn't done a ton of things after that. I wonder what this being in this film, being in A Clockwork Orange, like I wonder what that did to Malcolm McDowell, sort of career wise. I feel like he worked plenty, but he turns up in Star Trek Generations. It had been a minute since I'd seen him, um, but yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of doing a very quick. By the way, it says on his IMDb he has 12 projects coming up, and I mean, how old is he? He was born in 1943, so he's actually not as he's not as old as he looks, is he? So he's like, that makes him like 81. I think I just did some quick math. So he looked like he was 81, 20 years ago, but so I'm just sort of curious as to what happened. And God damn, this guy worked a lot, but it didn't seem like there was really, too much of a problem. Although, as I'm starting to see, after Caligula, he did like an H.G. Wells Time After Time. It's a lot of like smaller roles. So I don't know. Maybe this did hurt him. I wonder. I'll have to see if I can find an interview, do a little research on that. But I don't know. If I feel like this is the ultimate audition tape, Lemmy. You show somebody Caligula, it's like, oh, this guy can do anything.
Yeah.
I want him in my movie. Anyway, please let us know. You can find me Twitter, Instagram at Christian DMZ. I want people to share their thoughts on Caligula with me, and I will share with you if anybody, Lemmy, says shame on you for telling me I should watch that. Because I feel like I might get a few of those. There's people in my usual audience that I hope that very sweet lady named Lynn B. I think she would know not to watch this. This is not for you, Lynn. But I feel like Husey probably watches it every week. But I bring up Husey because one of the times that I was a judge, you guys were kind of debating movies you hated that other people like, and you immediately got my vote when you talked about a movie that I had only just recently realized how bad it was because I hadn't seen it in forever. It's The Breakfast Club, and I can see how it got made. I can see how it was largely enjoyed at the time, but it's a very bad movie, isn't it, Lemmy?
It really is. It's I get the whole nostalgia thing. It's got a great soundtrack, and I can get on board with the soundtrack. It's got an all-star cast for the time, but it was a terrible fucking movie.
Yeah, and it's also like you got Ali Sheedy in this movie, and you're trying to tell me Molly Ringwald is the hot one. I mean, I know, like different types, but I don't know. I think when she's decorating her picture with her dandruff, it probably I found her more attractive. But that says more about me. But it's like the characters are so broad. There's the fundamental idea of like what school is going to make kids do all day Saturday detention. I was as a kid, I'm like poking holes in it. I remember thinking it was fun, but what I found since the last time we talked about it is that John Hughes envisioned making a follow-up like every 10 years where like those characters would meet up again. And I couldn't think of a worse idea. He apparently hated Judd Nelson so much that it was never going to happen. But can you imagine anything worse than seeing where those characters got off to after a Breakfast Club, after his Defiant, I put my fist up in the air to show the principal what a badass I am?
No, not really. I'm not really big into like the 80s movies. I think I liked Can't Buy Me Love. That might have been the
It's a fun one. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't like Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I fucking hate that movie. It's so dumb. Love
uh,
Potion Number 9, maybe. That's an 80s movie, right?
what is it about? Maybe I can't remember if you mentioned it on that show. What is it about Ferris Bueller that you don't like? I mean, apart from probably everything, but
Terrible acting.
yeah,
Just how unrealistic everything is. The lack of
yeah,
adult supervision. The unrealistic lack of adult supervision. Just how normy the characters were. And I like Matthew Broderick. You know what I mean?
yeah. He's great in most things, Yeah, he's not the best driver, but other than that, he's very good. But yeah, and it's interesting, what you're saying about the lack of adult supervision. The one authority figure, Principal Rooney, is that actor Jeffrey Jones, who it was turned out had a lot of what we call PC, personal collection of. He's a pedophile, basically,
Yeah.
and so that makes that kind of adds a level of threat to it. Not for Jennifer Grey, who plays his sister, which even as a kid, there's that moment where she like sweet talks the principal, and it's like, I'm sorry, you thought that was his mother, Jennifer Grey? I mean, she had the old nose there, so maybe that had something to do with it. But I think that the Ferris Bueller character is a lot of fun in that movie, but I think everybody else is fairly terrible. The girl who plays his girlfriend, who I'd have to look up her name, and why would I do that? I think she was in other things, but
his best friend infuriated me. He was the most annoying fucking person I'd ever seen in a movie.
Right, and he went on to become, as an adult, he was on Spin City and in Succession, and also the captain of the Enterprise B in Star Trek Generations, just to bring it all full circle. He's supposed to be the worst captain in Starfleet history, a role that he played well. So Aaron in the chat says, there's something about Mary, American Pie, Meet the Fockers. I kind of hate these movies. So I can understand that point, but I do remember seeing American Pie. I was probably 23, so, a little old to be ogling at the high school girls, but I don't think any of them were actually that age, so it's probably fine. It was, I thought for its time, it's funny that this kid fucked a pie and his dad saw him doing it. There's other stuff in there that you can say things about, but it was a mainstream studio movie. Mm-hmm. And the kid fucked a pie. So I think that it maybe works on what we hear a lot about as 90s shock culture. We were definitely being shocked by that. That is a film that belongs in the same summer as Woodstock 99. But what do you think of American Pie? I'm just talking about the first one. We're not talking about
I would have to agree with Aaron. I watched them and I didn't like them. They're like the Hallmark card of comedy movies. I was more into like Road Trip and Harold and Kumar. Like the Van Wilder movies were really good.
Sure. Yeah. On my wife and my first date, Harold and Kumar had been in theaters, and it closed quickly. So, but there had been pop-up White Castles around Los Angeles, and to this day, there's no White Castles in Los Angeles. So we went on a quest to try and find it, and apparently it had closed quicker than expected. And I enjoyed the movie anyways. That's the long rambling version of that, but. I agree with all the movies you said. So you said Road Trip. What about Euro Trip? That strikes me as a movie.
Euro Trip.
Okay. Talk about brother and sister accidentally hooking up, by the way.
Yep. You guys are the worst twins ever.
Yeah, I know. Look, there's the accidental incest, and he didn't fuck his sister. He just made out with her, Yeah. And I mean, Caligula would say that doesn't even count. I mean, there was no penetration, so why are we even talking about it?
That's right? How they say hello in Europe. Pretty sure.
Exactly. What's a movie that maybe everybody hates that you really like, though? Sort of the reverse of that. I know Kaylee really likes Howard the Duck, and in some ways, again with Jeffrey Jones as the bad guy. Is there one that comes up where people can't believe that you like it? I'll sort of let you think about it. Speaking of Kaylee, when I was on her show, I really wanted to talk about Trainspotting because I really enjoyed the film, but I think that people can't see past two sort of objectionable moments, and they don't realize that it's actually a really funny movie. Yes, it's about heroin use, and yes, a character dies of AIDS in it, and yes, there's a dead baby, and yes, he jumps into a toilet. But god damn it, some of those stuff is really funny. So that's a movie that I'm a little bit of an apologist for, but it's hardly an obscure movie, and I think a lot of people think it's a good movie. But I always feel like it's like, no, it's like a movie about friendship, and it's actually really funny. Is there anything like that you feel like people misunderstand?
I can't think of any movies that I love that everybody hates, but there
Sure.
is a show that I've been watching that everybody seems to hate. And I understand why they hate it, because it's fucking terrible. It's a terrible show, but I've watched since season 1. So I'm like invested in this terrible soap opera of a show, and it's Grey's Anatomy. Like, I know how bad it is too. So
Wow.
like,
So you're like what, 22 years in? You're still all in? Yeah.
I'm in.
Oh,
I'm in it. I'm in it to win it.
my wife watched it for a while, but even she had to tap out at one point. But I do remember that was one of those shows that premiered after the Super Bowl, and I remember being in a room, with one of my wife's friends had thrown that party, and I was just like, I mean, this is just not good. I don't understand why anybody's watching this. This is terrible television. And then it's been on for 23 years.
Yep.
Um,
They even have a
so,
spin-off show called Station like 19.
oh yeah. I'm not usually the best judge, because if you remember the year that 30 Rock came out, they also had Aaron Sorkin's Studio 60 on the Sunset Strip. So they were both shows essentially about Saturday Night Live. And I watched both pilots, and I was like, that 30 Rock is terrible. To be fair, it's a different version of the pilot than what aired. There's some different casting. Jane Krasinski wasn't in it. Rachel Dratch was, but it was largely the same. And I was like, oh man, this Aaron Sorkin show it's really got legs. I think they're going to go pretty far with it. And I couldn't have been more wrong. So it happens sometimes that the instincts are bad, but that wasn't one where, like, as the season went along, I'm like, no, Studio 60 is still a really good show. Yeah, but that's interesting. So how often do you have to explain to people, like, yeah, I know, but I'm still watching Grey's Anatomy?
Once every couple months, because it'll come up just in casual
Yeah,
conversation. Somebody will be like, McDreamy. Somebody will make a reference about it, and I'll be like, oh, I understand that reference. I'll make a Grey's Anatomy's reference. Then I'll
right.
get you fucking watch Grey's Anatomy, and I'll be like, I know. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know it's terrible. You don't have to tell me.
Believe me, I know I shouldn't
Yeah.
be watching it. Seamus McGanus, did you like Train Spotting 2? Yes, I did. I actually thought it was incredibly well done. And Danny Boyle had the right approach of, he wanted to wait for a while for them to be older, a little fatter, a little bit more sad. And I think that story works really well. I encouraged Kaylee to watch it, and I said that I would come back to talk about that on Once Over with Kaylee, which is a channel that I hope people have subscribed to at this point. But yeah, I thought it was a very good sequel. The book had a sequel called Porno, which would not have worked very well as a direct sequel. Basically, the sick boy character, is a pimp, which those threads were in the first book and the first movie, but then he gets into the porn industry, and I just don't think it would have worked as well. Well, Seamus McGanus agrees with me, Lemmy. So obviously, I'm on the right side of history if I have someone of the esteem of Seamus McGanus. So yeah, and look, it's always fun to talk about different opinions on movies. And before we wind up for real, I want to know what you think of sort of like, some of the big iconic franchises. Obviously, we briefly talked about Star Trek, and obviously, I'm sort of wondering, do you generally, so here's my history of Star Trek. My mom used to watch it when she was in high school. So it was Friday night, which was supposed to be date night. But if somebody was going to be dating my mom, they'd be sitting at home watching Star Trek with her. And so I grew up, that was on. We had a VCR before anybody I knew, Lemmy, because my mom needed to record Star Trek every night in the reruns because she really wanted to see The Trouble with Tribbles. So I saw all those movies, and I think many of them are good. Some are fun. And there's a couple that are just, dog shit terrible. But So I have a soft spot for that, but also as a kid, I just loved Star Wars because it was like, oh yeah, people are fighting and there's a lot of explosions and they don't take the time to talk about all the science. What do you think about things like the Star Trek and Star Wars franchises, Lemmy?
I actually have a very similar story about Star Trek, except it's with my dad, and he watched Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Right.
I'm guessing your mom watched Generations with
Uh,
Picard or with Captain
yeah.
Kirk.
Oh, yeah. No. I mean, when that was first run, the Next Generation. I mean, my whole family, like, we would sit there and watch it. It was very exciting that there was a new Star Trek show.
Me and my dad
Despite
would
that,
also do that.
yeah. Despite
And
that,
he
really,
also recorded it on VHS. He recorded
yeah.
every single one, and to this day, he has the entire series on VHS.
Oh, I love that. I used to record a lot of shows, and some of it was like I would record SNL because I'd want to rewatch sketches, but stuff like that, it was like, oh, I need this. I have to preserve it because I'm not going to be able to one day just grab my phone and be able to watch whole seasons and order them for like, oh, I could get all 7 seasons for $100. So yeah, so your dad was the one that was really into Star Trek, and there's a lot of ups and downs, but any franchise that's gone on that long, I think it's
I think
to be
every
expected.
adult should watch it. I think every adult should watch Star Trek: The Next Generation at least once through because it stays relevant. It's generationally relevant. All the same shit seems to happen every generation, and they've seemed to have touched on all of it. It's so
Uh,
strange.
yeah, no, and I mean the storytelling, and keeping in mind it's the 80s into the 90s, so it's that long ago, but the storytelling is so much more sophisticated than even what was on TV back then, and I think a lot of it holds up. Sort of dealing with things like, Picard briefly, but still being assimilated by the Borg, and I mean the effects of that still being felt in the sequel series that they did. Seamus McGannis brings up a point. Did you recognize Deanna Troi in Caligula? So Marina Sirtis, I think is how you say her name. She was in Caligula, and I did not recognize her, and I'm sort of ashamed that I didn't. Did you recognize Counselor Troi in Caligula?
No, and I can't
Yeah.
think of who she would have been.
Maybe she's just like a background actor, or maybe she's in one of the dirty scenes. But yeah, I'm trying to find this. Sirtis is actually how you say her name, but I did not. Okay, so
Was she in the
there.
Temple of Isis as one of like the
Well,
dancers?
yeah. So the interesting thing is that it might be a rumor that she's in it. So answers.com. All right. I feel like, I've been on shows and I go to Snopes and people go like, oh no, stop it. Oh, you know what? They don't have an answer. They're asking the question. So we don't actually have the, so what kind of answer is that? Answers.com. But so yeah, I can't find proof of it. So Seamus, she's in an orgy. You know what? If that's true, good for her, because she was able to read everybody's minds and feel all their emotions. So she knew what everybody wanted, and she gave it to them. So good for her. Seamus McGannis is firm. I believe you. I don't know why somebody would make that up, whether their name is Seamus McGannis or not. I'm going to have to try and find the time code for where she is because, Lemmy, I didn't know that I needed an excuse to go back and watch it. And that's maybe not the scene that I was going to go to, but I definitely want to find her. It's interesting because, I think there are a lot of people with strong opinions about, Star Trek versus Star Wars. And honestly, when I was a kid, more people like Star Wars. But you do get those people who like love Star Trek, but they actually hate Star Wars. And I'm just going to talk about the original 3 films because you can make all the cases you want about the prequels and the super sequels and the TV series. Did you find that you identified or you related to the stories as well as you did for Star Trek, or was Star Trek still number one near and dear in your heart?
Star Trek is absolutely number one dear to my heart. Like, and I like Star Wars. Star Wars was very cool, and I could even see the two of them coexisting in the same little universe, which is fucking cool.
That is cool. Yeah.
But I don't know. I felt it was more my pace. I'll use like the Tool A Perfect Circle comparison. You know what I mean? They could be the
Yeah.
exact same thing. You could argue that they're the same thing, but
Right.
one's a more like, I hate to say this, but like one's a more intellectual thing, and one's like a morality, intellectual, opening up your eyes to new worlds type vibe, and the other one is a more like action. And it does have an aspect of morality to it, you know, rebellion and fucking
Yeah, of
Imperials and
course.
shit
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that. But like, it's more of an action film. It's more of an action thing than it is like a discovery thing.
Yeah, I think the way that I usually lean into it is that Star Trek, it's like the science is capitalized in science fiction, and with Star Wars, it's like really small, and it's like science fiction, but also fantasy. You know, it's just
Bare
like
bones, the bare
yeah,
bones of science,
there's
like the birth of science fiction almost.
and part of it is Star Trek being a TV series for whatever, like 800 episodes worth, and they like need the time where we sit in the room in Picard's ready room and we explain all of it. But it's also like they're taking the time to say like, yeah, this is all made up, but we're going to tell you how it works. And I'm like, oh my god, yeah, Star Wars, it's just like yeah, so we're just going to go and do that, and then we'll blow it up and everybody will be safe. Oh, okay,
Yeah,
cool.
you got
Yeah.
like, you can compare C3PO to Data. Like
Yeah.
C3PO is just some gay British robot that is kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Whereas Data is like trying to discover like some sort of humanity, and writes poetry and composes music and paints and like fucks. You know what I mean? He's
Yeah, C3PO
complex.
was never going to fuck Denise Crosby. That
No.
was not going to happen. By the way, now that you're putting in this context, C3PO has disdain for humanity, I think. He knows he's better than all of them, whereas Data really wants to be it. Just to, close out the thread on Counselor Troy, Seamus McKinney says she cries about it at cons now. She was apparently also the rape victim in a Death Wish movie. Look, I mean, you want to become an actress and there's, auditions. What are you saying no to when you're first starting out,
Yep. You got to break a few eggs to make an omelet,
yeah.
lady.
Yeah, exactly. What did you think of the recent Picard follow-up series that
I
they
didn't
did?
watch it. I didn't watch it. I'm one of those like apprehensive to preserve the thing that I love, and I didn't want it to suck.
It's tough because season 3 is really good with tons of fan service, so it's fun. But the second season of that show is possibly the worst science fiction that I've ever seen in my life, and I've seen some bad stuff. It's really bad. Like it's shockingly bad. Like I was doing a weekly after show for it, and my co-host and I are like, "Why are we doing this to ourselves?" So then we didn't do that for season 3, and then season 3 was actually good because they got the band back together. But in any case, so the final thing I'll ask you, and then I'll let you go. And I appreciate you being on this week, and we'll continue a conversation on figuring out some other movies to talk about. One of the things that surprised me about our buddy Husey is that he unironically really likes most of the Marvel films. Like I thought he was shitting on them. Something he said. He's like, no, actually, like there's a couple he doesn't like, but there's like 30 of them. You better not like all of them. What do you think about superheroes? Do you find some work and some don't, or is it a genre that's not really for you, Lemmi?
It overwhelms me.
Yeah.
I've seen like Iron Man,
Yeah.
1, 2, and 3. I've seen 2 of the Guardians of the Galaxies. I refuse to watch the third one because I know I'm going to learn about Rocket's backstory, and I know enough to know that like I'm not going to make it through.
Yeah.
I'm very tender-hearted when it comes to movies like that.
Sure.
But I find it exhausting. I find superhero movies to be incredibly just. I'll fall asleep during like the more action sequence it is, and the more repetitive, mechanical, and explosive noises there are, I will fall asleep.
Yeah. That happened to my wife when we went to see The Flash last summer. There was a point where she just like, it wasn't that late. It was like an early evening. She just like ducked out because she's like, all right, so what happened after they found, Supergirl being held hostage or whatever? I was like, oh, kind of a lot. And then I went through it and I was like, oh, you know what? It actually wasn't that much. You picked a point. That's a good point. And she's good at that though, because when we went to see Tenet, the Christopher Nolan film, there's a point where it just was getting so convoluted and so hard to follow. She just went to sleep for a little bit and then she was able to finish the movie. I'm like, you know what? I kind of like that knowledge that sometimes you just have to shut it all off, you know? So the very final thing, is there anything coming out this year or anything that's been announced that you're like, I'm really excited for this movie, this series, this anything? What stays on Lemmy's radar that you're like, I can't wait for this?
I'm not a really big movie person anymore. I don't really keep up with it. I'm more of like my favorite YouTube, Ants Canada, is going to be building a vivarium, and he's uploading on Sunday.
Sweet.
That's more my speed.
Yeah. But what that tells me is that there would be something that could, if it gets your attention, then it must be, if there is something even over recent years that's like, oh, I am looking forward to that. It must be really good, or like really something crazy. Like, I don't know what that would be, but to get your attention, they have to really make a splash, right?
It's only gotten my attention. The movie world has only really gotten my attention in a bad way. Like them saying that they're going to remake The Labyrinth, or they're going to make a Zelda movie. I'm like, You fucking better not. I'll riot the streets. I'll find people to help me. You better not do either of those things.
Yeah, no, I mean, a remake of Labyrinth, there's so many questions. Who has a bulge the size of David Bowie? The answer is no one. So that there is why you should not make that movie. Seamus McCann says, a good name for a Lemmi review channel, On Lemmy's Radar. It'd be interesting to know what's on your radar. It'd be like, here's a list of 10 things. Have you even heard of that? And it's hard, though, because everything, like you're saying, they're going to make a Zelda movie. Everything is, using existing intellectual property, or a reboot or a sequel. But yeah, it's like, here's the list of the 10 nominees for Best Picture. Which one of these movies had you heard of? It could be fun to sort of play that game. But the final thing I'm going to say now, for real, is you're talking about Labyrinth. I brought my grandmother to see that with me when I was 10 because I was a Star Wars nerd. So I'm like, oh, this is a Lucasfilm movie and I want to see it. And 2 years before that, I brought her to see Gremlins. And I had no idea how much, my grandmother must have hated me, but I didn't. But no, you know what? I'm going to look at this the other way. My grandmother must have loved me because after Gremlins, she still took me to the movies. So she's like, I'll put up with it. But I can't imagine that she ever would have seen either of those films. And maybe it helps that right in the middle of the year in between those two, we went and saw Back to the Future, which she did really like. So I guess maybe it's not all bad. But I also can't imagine watching Labyrinth with my kids. My son's about to turn 9, and I'm like, there's too many questions,
No, my mother, my mom showed me The Labyrinth at it came out the year I was born.
Okay.
So, and my mother was like really into like the Dark Crystal. My mom loves sci-fi, so I grew up watching that movie from like understanding age. That was a staple in my childhood.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, and when they did a within the last few years, they did a sort of a Netflix revival of Dark Crystal. And,
it was great.
I thought it was. I was shocked. Well, not shocked because nothing that happens in terms of canceled series surprised me anymore, but I couldn't believe that they weren't going to do more of it. I thought it was so well done. And I went back and watched the original movie for the first time in like, I don't know, decades. And I was like, I don't know how this got made, but I'm glad it did. I mean, I guess Jim Henson could kind of write his own ticket, but yeah. Well, Lemmi, it's been delightful talking about Caligula and just some other odds and ends. It's always sort of a good way to kind of start connecting with people is through movies. And I'm so glad that our first voyage together, our first road trip together was with Caligula playing. And we'll have to figure out something to do again soon. Would you like people to be able to find you anywhere, or do you want them to have to work for where they can find Lemmi?
Twitch.tv/Little Lemi and YouTube @Little Lemi. That's me. Go follow if you want. I don't care if you don't.
Yeah, you're not going to lose any sleep over it. But Chris also puts in a vote for hashtag On Lemmy's Radar. And
here at number 2, we have Baumgartner's Restoration, where we're going to watch some dudes scrape rabbit wax glue off the back of a 49-year-old painting.
It's perfect. Thank you again to Lemmi. We've got some fun shows planned in the weeks ahead, and I know we're inching close to Bladtcast number 600, and I hope to have something to announce about that soon, but I don't have anything to announce right now. So keep your ears open. Subscribe, like, smash that like button, y'all, on our YouTube page, Bladtcast, Bladtcast, and follow me on social media at Christian DMZ. Thanks again to Lemmi. Thanks again to Malcolm McDowell for just really giving it his all and giving us something to talk about some 44 years later. But that is all the time we have for now, and we'll see you next time on the Bladtcast.